Superman is the beacon of strength in the DC universe and beyond. Meanwhile, his greatest archenemy, Lex Luthor, is a genius evil mastermind who does not need superpowers to go against the godly superhero. Luthor is also ambitious, and as such, he does not wish to stop what he has. With the desire to create an army of supermen, all under his command, Luthor tried to develop a clone who would be stronger and smarter than the Kryptonian, all while acting as his puppet. Needless to say, such a complicated dream was not easy to achieve, and that was exactly the challenge that Luthor faced time and again with Subject B-0, who was supposed to be a Superman clone recreated in Luthor's image. In today's video, we'll talk about this very character and the storylines in which it has appeared. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Subject B-0? Similar to, but not the same as the Bizarro we know, Subject B-0 made his debut in DC Comics in November 2013, appearing in Superman Volume 3, Issue 23.1. The story in the debut comic directly helped understand the origins of Subject B-0 without beating around the bush. Lex Luthor had been developing anti-Superman technology for quite some time. The superhero's unpredictable nature helped harm his reputation. Luthor was able to get his hands on Superman's blood sample, while the latter had a split lip and was strangling Luthor. The military intended to create a superhuman soldier as well, approximately as strong as Superman himself. However, they could never go beyond putting regular human pilots in strong exoskeletons. Luthor, being ambitious, aimed to recreate Superman, but in his own image. A Superman who was less unpredictable, a Superman who would be loyal to Luthor, a Superman who would do anything Luthor asked him to do, and of course, a Superman who would not be the same unthinkable brute as the original, but a stronger and smarter version of him. You might be a little confused about how Luthor would get a smarter Superman to act as his puppet. Well, he did intend to use certain hypnotics to keep the subject as his pawn. Luthor wanted to go beyond the limitations of armor and instead augment humans with Kryptonian DNA. In fact, he did not want one Superman, but instead an army under his command. Using the drop of blood from Superman's split lip, Luthor mapped the Kryptonian genome and spliced it with human DNA. He then genetically modified the end result, hoping to create something stronger and smarter than Superman. Soon, it became evident that he had a test subject, a scrawny young boy named Bobby, who just seemed happy to be there. Luthor explained the process to Bobby, claiming that the DNA he had created will enter his body and merge with his own DNA. It would be delivered by an adenovirus in the serum that would be injected into his body. Microscopic nanobots would handle the rest of the process, ensuring uniform delivery and bonding of the DNA throughout the cellular structure. Bobby was incapable of wrapping his head around all the science, but he was just happy to be of help. He had put Luthor on a pedestal for caring for him, or rather, for being the only person to ever caring for him, oblivious to Luthor's true intention. Bobby offered Luthor his help whenever he needed it in order to repay him for his so-called kindness. The serum was injected into Bobby, who coughed out some of the nanobots, which Luthor believed to be a good sign. With the bots having done their job, Luthor exposed Bobby to a dose of concentrated sunlight, hoping to enhance his Kryptonian DNA, thus giving him the power of Superman. The process worked, and out of the blue, Bobby turned into the muscular Superman. Suddenly, Luthor realized that the cellular mitosis taking place inside Bobby was abnormally fast, which meant that he was not his perfect Superman. Meanwhile, Bobby writhed in pain as his body changed to become chalky white, somewhat like the previous Bizarro that we knew, the one who had fallen in love with Lois Lane. Bobby broke the restraints and jumped out to attack everyone in the lab. Luthor tried to stop him and had hoped that the hypnotics released in his brain would make Bobby yield to his commands. However, Luthor realized that the subject's brain cells were swelling like the muscles in his body while pressing against his skull. However, with the indestructible body, his skull would not explode. This would cause the blood flow to his brain to get cut off, making Subject B-0 as dumb as they come. In short, he would be unable to comprehend Luthor's commands, and as such, fail at carrying them out. Luthor locked the raging subject in a room, and seemed disappointed over creating a Superman just as stupid as the Superman he knew. Subject B-0 soon broke out of the room, prompting Luthor to use kryptonite rays from his anti-Superman technology to attack him. B-0 stumbled backward, but not for long since his human DNA had made him capable of withstanding kryptonite much better than other Kryptonians. Luthor went to launch his Lexbots superheated plasma drones, Hounds and transdimensional quantum hounds at Subject B-0, who took everything down, leaving Luthor to use his last and most formidable option, his brain. He noticed how Subject B-0 seemed to be growing in strength and mass constantly, which gave him the idea he needed. He lured Subject B-0 back into the experiment lab and exposed him to more concentrated sunlight. The creature screamed in pain and asked for help while his body swelled up and began to look like it was foaming. Soon the creature burst, and everyone in the room, barring Luthor, seemed to be dead, including his assistants. Luthor realized that the concentrated solar radiation had oversaturated the subject's Kryptonian DNA, filling them up to the point of bursting while the human DNA could not handle its pressure. This meant that Luthor would have to omit the idea of the human DNA as a whole and get his hands on something more durable or stick to developing a pure Kryptonian. Instead of treating that as a project failure, Luthor treated that as a lesson, with reference to what not to do again, as he began to strive for perfection the next time. So he took samples from the creature who was then dead to continue with his research. Luthor grew a Kryptonian body in his lab instead of splicing it with any DNA. He programmed the clone to obey him without question, and then gestated the subject in a tube. The 2016 Forever Evil storyline brought forward Subject B-0 once again, but in a very different setting. The crime syndicate, or the evil Justice League from Earth 3, seemed to have defeated our Justice League. This strange development was announced to the world as well. 5 years following the event, the crime syndicate caused a global power outage to dominate the planet. The machine where Luthor had left his clone to gestate began to falter as a result of the lack of power supply, which in turn began to decay the clone. Luthor was left with no choice but to either use an incomplete clone or lose his years of work. Naturally, he went for the first option. As the subject came out of incubation, Luthor commanded it to kill Otis, the security guard around him. The subject grunted and did nothing, making Luthor believe that it was not loyal to him. He angrily commanded him to kill Otis once more, while Otis pulled out his kryptonite machinery to defend himself against the creature. However, the guard changed his mind and turned his weapon towards Lex Luthor. This aggravated the creature, prompting him to jump in and kill Otis to save Luthor. Luthor got a replica of Superman's costume for Subject B-0, who wore it inside out. At the same time, Luthor began to gather villains from his Injustice League in order to fight the crime syndicate. The thing was, the villains had generally been against the Justice League of America, but this time both sides had a common enemy in the crime syndicate, who hailed from a different dimension altogether. Luthor connected Subject B-0's warsuit to one of the orbiting satellites owned by LexCorp. A satellite dish was moved to face eastwards, allowing B-0's warsuit to connect to it. Once that worked out, B-0 succeeded at pinpointing Ultraman's location, who is the evil and crime syndicate counterpart of Superman. After grouping with some of the other villains, Luthor and Subject B-0 found themselves in Metropolis. They stood near an abandoned repair shop for refrigerators in the city's suburbs as Lex tried to resuscitate Black Adam. Subject B-0 observed everything while Captain Cold tinkered with his cold gun. Lex also came up with a strategy to fight the members of the syndicate by exploiting their weaknesses. The villains then began to head to the sewers to reach one of Wayne Enterprises' storage facilities, but their journey was brought to an abrupt halt when it was revealed that Subject B-0 was terrified of the dark. Whether it was because he gained strength from sunlight or something entirely else was unknown, but either way, the villains asked Lex to proceed without his clone. Unwilling to do so, Lex asked the others to go on without them. He then turned to the subject and told him a story from his teen years, a story about his fears. When Lex was 17 years old, his sister had grown very ill. Unlike B-0, Lex was never afraid of the dark. Instead, he was afraid of failure. He wanted to save his sister, but was afraid that his efforts would be futile. So instead of trying to help her, he did nothing. She probably would have died either way, but that would not change the guilt that Lex had to bear for never making an effort. Not long after, the subject placed his hands on Lex's shoulder and said, "Bizarro, try." He also displayed enough self-awareness here to rename himself from B-0 to Bizarro, and even though the two bizarre Kryptonian interpretations have different origins, in a way, they are both the reimaginations of the same character. Luthor and B-0 continued down the sewers and arrived at their destination. Black Adam and Bizarro crashed through the facility's floor, which helped them find a way in. However, things got complicated when the villains found Batman and Catwoman there, who had beaten them to it. The villains were under the impression that both Batman and Superman were dead, but on seeing Batman, they began to wonder if Superman happened to be alive as well. Meanwhile, Batman used smoke bombs at them and tried to turn on the mother box they had been tinkering with. Soon Power Ring caught caught up to the villains and was surprised to see Batman alive as well. Batman then put on Sinestro Corps ring and approached Dick Grayson, or Nightwing. While Batman apologized to him for cutting his family off, Grayson told him that the device he was strapped to was a bomb. Elsewhere, the members of the crime syndicate arrived to attack Sinestro, Black Adam, and Deathstroke, while Batman stays stuck in the chamber with Nightwing, Catwoman, B-0, and Lex. The situation was complicated because Nightwing was strapped to a bomb which was tied to his heart rate. That meant that for the others to survive, Nightwing had to die, otherwise everyone else would die. Batman was reluctant to let that happen, but Luthor was not. He knocked Batman to the ground by blasting him in the back while Subject B-0 kept Catwoman subdued. Luthor walked up to Nightwing and placed his hands over Grayson's mouth and nose, blocking his airflow. He apologized to the young man for doing this, and Nightwing suffocated to death. As they escaped, Lex revealed the truth to Batman. He knew that he needed Batman by his side and could not be in his bad books, so he told Batman that he caused Grayson's heart to flatline using the cardioplegia pill, which paralyzed the cardiac muscles. However, without a shot of adrenaline to jumpstart the heart soon, Grayson would remain dead. To prevent the worst from happening, Luthor injected Grayson with adrenaline, and the young man coughed back to life. Ecstatic, Bruce hugged him, which Subject B-0 noticed. He drew parallels between Bruce and Nightwing's relationship to that of his and Luthor's. As such, B-0 rushed to Luthor to hug him, who was not that interested in hugging his so-called ward. Luthor's Injustice League regrouped to fight the crime syndicate, and they revealed to be holding Mazes, or Alexander Luthor, who was the Earth 3 counterpart of Lex Luthor. Alexander went after Lex, but with B-0 on the latter's side, the subject rushed to his creator's rescue. He defended Lex from Alexander's attacks, but he proved to be too weak for the enemy. He managed to protect Lex Luthor, but in the process, got Alexander's fist in his chest. His power was also taken away as Lex rushed to his creation's side. In fact, Lex began to show sympathy for the subject and exclaimed to him that he could fix him. With his powers gone, B-0 knew that he could not be fixed. He told Lex that as he died in his arms. Soon, Captain Cold asked Lex to flee, leaving the monster's body alone. The comment enraged Lex, who was already moved by his creation's death, making him say that even though B-0 was a monster, it was his monster. What makes B-0 so deadly? Right off the bat, B-0 is deadly because he is modeled after Superman, one of the DC Universe's strongest beings. B-0's physiology is similarly durable, which allows him to have superhuman strength, speed, and stamina. He can exceed the speed of sound and bend reinforced steel with ease. He even ties with Professor Zoom when it comes to speed. Other than that, his body is invulnerable, which allows him to withstand any kind of physical force such as lasers, missiles, bombs, and of course, bullets. He is even able to survive and use his superhuman abilities in a vacuum, while in outer space without much discomfort. What differentiates B-0 from Superman is the fact that unlike the latter, B-0 does not need the external assistance of solar radiation to use his powers. He does not even need to drink or eat anything, giving him a self-sustainable body. Other than that, B-0 can fly, breathe fire, and emit cold steam from his eyes, which contradicts Superman's powers, who is renowned for his heat vision and freeze breath. And finally, B-0 is immune to kryptonite, making him a ridiculously tough foe to go against. Marvelous verdict. It was interesting to see Lex Luthor get emotionally involved with one of his creations. A lot of the credit for this can go to B-0 himself, who expressed substantial empathy toward his creator. With that, today's video comes to an end. What did you think of Subject B-0? Did you enjoy this video? And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.